Okay, well, it looks like we're live. We're been having a busy election year, and I wanted to get a little information out about the election coming up. But today's focus is going to be about an election 6 years ago, and I I have a website that's not just Jack's Tea Party, but I've got a website in China, which let me see if I can show you that. Um, and here we are. This is a website that I have that discusses China, and the the web address that we're going to talk about is part of this website. Uh, but right now, we just had a big COVID problem in China where they literally locked down the big parts of the country, stopping the economy, and it's really it's an aggressive approach that they used 2 years ago when they first had the virus, and it's almost like a one-trick pony. Uh, that's the way they respond now is locking things down. Uh, and the people reacted pretty negatively. This was a web page called We're Wolves of China. This is a posting called We're Wolves of China. And basically, people were starving. They had a 40-story building that didn't have water or electricity. And there was actually a suicide, somebody jumping out. And Huaguoyan is a part of Guiyang that is extremely high density, one of the most densely populated areas there are. And this is just my website keeps track of what's been going on in China since I've been living in the U.S. I'm real estate appraiser. I don't have time to keep up, but I've made a few posts of what's been happening in Guizhou since I left to come back. And here was one about the flying tigers. A lot of people don't realize that what a relationship we've had with China over the years. We had American Air Force personnel take a leave of absence and fly to China to defend that country from the Japanese in World War II. That was about the flying tigers. So anyway, this is the old website, and well, I'm happy to have Ray Mahoney with us today to talk about what's going on in China. You got me? Okay, good. Welcome, Ray.
Hi.
Ray has got 24 years in China. He happened to be back in the U.S. Right during the period after the election. And he's already watched this video once, and I asked him to comment on the different issues that I brought up and try to get this a little bit less boring than just listen to me reading. So we'll just carry on, and we can hear you, Ray. You can speak up when you have something to say, okay?
Okay.
We'll just go forward with the video.
So you were in Guiyang and I was in Harbin at the time, both reacting to the news about the 2000 election.
Okay, so you were in the election in Guiyang at that time.
I was in Northeast China. You were in Southwest China. We were in different
Okay.
poles of the country, of China.
Okay. Very good.
And you were functioning as you were a retiree on a 2-month visa at a time. I was still working. I hadn't hit the magical age of retirement. But
okay, very good. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about these comments, and you'll be able to just chime in when you want to there. because I didn't trust the mail. The mail was delivered my ballot a week late uh, in the 2014 election. So I came back and made sure that I voted. Then I went back to China. And this is a website about this story is about my return to China and a particular meeting that I had. And it's called The View from China 2016 USA Election. And this was written extemporaneously in, you see, December 13th. That's just about a month after the US election of 2016. It has been 1 month since the election of 2016. This will be my first blog post that is purely political, something I have steadfastly refused to do on this Tour Grade Joe website. So I have waited a month to decide whether this feeling of sharing my ideas to the larger community diminishes. It doesn't. Fair enough, this subject affects the foreigner in China, particularly Americans. After being forced by age limit into retirement from my university teaching job in Guiyang, I have spent my time on the internet tutoring children of friends and traveling. I've spent about 8 or 9 months a year in China and am prepared to continue this pattern for the long term, whatever that means at age 66. I made it a point to return to my hometown, Traverse City, to make sure my vote got counted in the presidential election. 2 years ago, the express mail lost my ballot. Also, I felt an urge to be with my people, whatever the hell that means, during this crucial time in the history of my country. When I arrived, I was immediately besieged by my countrymen who told me that I must vote for blank because if blank wins, it will be the end of the world or worse. By the way, I want to interject here that having spent close to 13 years in China, going back and forth, your culture changes. I don't view a lot of American television shows, and I've gradually changed into more of an international citizen than just a U.S. citizen. I've never felt like a citizen of China, but I have felt multicultural. So anyway, this is relevant to a foreigner living in China because it happens to all of us. We are immersed in a foreign culture and gradually we change. Our peer groups are no longer just Americans, no longer just foreigners, but Chinese friends and all of that just mixes in. Back to the website. People would confront me about who I voted for, who was I going to vote for, etc. I told everybody that I plan to vote for Jill Stein because I don't have to vote for anybody I don't like. I didn't like either of the major party candidates. Jill Stein is the leader of the Green Party and a presidential candidate. For the life of me, I don't know why she couldn't persuade Bernie to take her place and run for president on the Green Party ticket. Their platforms are almost identical. So how I voted is really irrelevant to this post, but it exposes my bias for all to know. I like trees and flowers and chirping birds, and I like to swim in clean water with my mouth open, no worries. I grew up in Cadillac, Michigan, USA, an area of clean lakes and rivers, and never had a problem swimming until I swam in the ocean once and I realized that I swim with my mouth open. Back to the subject. It was 2 weeks after the election, and I was at an English corner in Guiyan. English corners are places where Chinese come to practice their English. It is an exceptional English corner in that it is patronized by young people with an exceptionally high level of English. Many of the 20 or 25 people in the room have lived overseas or are just good students. Ray, you were part of the English corner culture. Could you describe a little bit about what you were doing? You were a little more active in English corners than I was, but what is the English corner and why is it important for U.S. and Chinese to participate?
I was a teacher in a couple of universities in China, and that was typically a place for students who didn't maybe weren't taking an English class at the time, but still they could come and chat with a foreigner. And there was a lot of curiosity. If they didn't have good enough English skills, still they the presence of one of these samples of the outside world was there for them to experience. Obviously, it wasn't such an interesting or it was old hat for people that lived in the big cities in Shanghai, Beijing, those type of places. But when I was a teacher in a place like Fuyang, Anhui, that was they didn't see too many foreigners, so that was a very interesting thing for people, students, or even people to come in and chat with us. Same thing happened with Guiyang. You noted correctly that you had a pretty high level of English speakers there. A lot of people had traveled abroad. Guiyang, the circles we were moving in was pretty rich and experienced. Although
privileged. They
Yeah.
were privileged Chinese kids, I think, and we talk about transmitting American culture into China, and that's I took advantage of the opportunity to explain something about elections and all that, but at the same time, the Chinese did a little job on me because the conversations were extremely cordial. Nobody was arguing with anybody, and we were talking about politics, something I couldn't do in the U.S. I guess you talk about free speech in the U.S. and the speech being controlled in China. Well, I would submit that this evening that I'm talking about on this English corner, I was a lot less inhibited and because I was in China. Had I been in the U.S. saying the same things, I think I'd have had an argument. But well, let's go on and see the rest of this here.
Well, let me add a bit more to that. The topic of the English corners, but also about elections. English corners. I got to China in 2000 into Shanghai, and Shanghai's parks. There was a long-established one in the People's Park, English corner, that had been going on for 30 years, and it was quite an institution. Lots of foreigners got there. For us to talk about politics at that point, 2016, it was easier. I had been talking with people video chatting of late, and one guy, I guess to make it so he didn't get censored, he was reading me the party line about Taiwan is an integral part of China. That he was reading the translation of the current state. So people are protecting themselves, are influenced by politics at all points.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on here. The topic for discussion was the U.S. election, and I had returned from the U.S. As a kind of a warm-up. They had a question about who the heads were on a Mount Rushmore. This is kind of intriguing for Chinese. They saw the 4 heads on Mount Rushmore, and everybody was stumped about who was this Teddy Roosevelt guy. I explained that he was one of the most famous presidents in U.S. history, and he helped win the Spanish-American War. If that hadn't happened, we, that is America, probably wouldn't be over here, that is an Asian power. Winning that war awarded the Philippines to the U.S., and Roosevelt also broke up the big trusts, that is the corporations, that were controlling our economy. After telling them about my experience in the U.S., a lot of people said their feelings about the election, and surprisingly, there was a lot of Trump support. What I found most surprising was that nobody seemed to care whether anybody was right or wrong. In China, the Communist Party is responsible for governing the country, not the people. The people in the English corner really had no incentive to convince each other who was right or wrong. It wasn't their business. It was an extremely friendly discussion, just about the opposite of what I left in the US. It was kind of refreshing to have an intelligent discussion about politics without anybody emotionally freaking out. Then each person was asked who their favorite presidents were in all history, anywhere in the world. It was a surprising list of very diverse opinions. Everybody seemed to respect each other's opinions, and there were US presidents listed, Chinese presidents, and a few others from around the world. After telling them about my experience in the US, a lot of people said their feelings about the election, and surprisingly, there was a lot of Trump support. What I found most surprising was that nobody seemed to care whether anybody was right or wrong. In China, the Communist Party is responsible for governing the country, not the people. The people in the English corner really had no incentive to convince each other who was right or wrong. It wasn't their business. It was an extremely friendly discussion, just about the opposite of what I left in the US. It was kind of refreshing to have an intelligent discussion about politics without anybody emotionally freaking out. Then each person was asked who their favorite presidents were in all history, anywhere in the world. It was a surprising list of very diverse opinions. Everybody seemed to respect each other's opinions, and there were US presidents listed, Chinese presidents, and a few others from around the world. Everybody seemed curious about who I would name as my favorite two presidents. I said I really didn't remember this guy's name, but if you saw Independence Day, my favorite president, he was the guy that got in the jet and went up to fight off the aliens. He actually united the world to fight the aliens. They didn't buy that explanation, but I got a good laugh. I just said that he was the president that I wish we had. I went on to say that my favorite president was Ford. Ford was the only one that never was elected as president or vice president. He pardoned Nixon, which was the right thing to do, and he defied Congress when he wanted to get the American babies out of Vietnam. That was called the baby lift. I had a chance to explain how our system works a little bit. In 1974, Ford was in charge of getting the U.S. out of Vietnam. Congress cut off the funds, saying that no money could be used for Vietnam. Ford was very strong. He said that American soldiers had wives and babies in Vietnam, and the babies were American citizens. It was our duty to bring them home. Congress had a majority of Democrats in both houses and was very happy to embarrass the president. Getting the GI's babies home was less important to them than embarrassing the president. Instead of whining and complaining, Ford said that he was commander-in-chief of the military and he would get the money to bring those babies home. Ford went around the country talking to groups of Americans and explaining that we had a duty to the soldiers and those American babies in Vietnam. He got the money privately and brought the babies home. Ford had the guts to do what was right. When Dr. Henry Kissinger, who the Chinese know well, was once asked who he thought was the best president of all that he had worked with, he said that Gerald Ford was the closest thing to a real human being that ever occupied the White House. Abe Lincoln, who freed the slaves and saved the Union, was my second choice. So that's the kind of thing I did in China. I tried to do a little bit of teaching and a little bit of politicking, but very, very covertly. I never called attention to myself. Never got any blowback from the Chinese Communist Party. I got along with those guys okay, but I was still able to help help spread the word about democracy. Well, that's the story about my English Corner experience right after the election, and I thought it was interesting to compare the atmosphere in America between 2016 and 2022. I didn't try to say that Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton was better than each other or anything like that. I was more interested in the process of how people think about politics in the U.S. and in China. And incidentally, in the last 6 years, this is being recorded in 2022, things are drastically different. Instead of people freaking out emotionally whenever you say something about politics, a lot of people just kind of go catatonic on you. They don't even want to talk about it. They don't want anything to do with politics. And that's, I consider to be a very dangerous situation because unlike China, which is going to be governed whether or not the people are involved or regardless of what the people think, the U.S. government requires people to agree or nothing gets done. So the government generally just stops when the people are in total disagreement. You can't get anything done in Congress. Presidents are afraid to do anything because they're going to be criticized. It's kind of a timely topic because in a couple weeks, well, maybe in a month from when you see this, we're going to be voting again in 2022, and a new cycle will begin. Okay, Ray, that's a good way to end that website. Spread the word about democracy. Unfortunately, we have some people today that are spreading the word about democracy as well. Not so flattering. The media picks up a lot, and but it's all part of the same system. And what's your impression of that? What about the whole idea of the baby lift? And we had a similar event in Afghanistan. Or was that? Yeah, that was Afghanistan with the what's the name of that Arab group that took over Afghanistan when we left? Remember that, Ray?
The Taliban is there, and then we were fighting.
Taliban, yeah. So there's
fighting against another one that bombed the World Trade Center, who was some of those.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the imagery of uh, uh, people hanging off the legs of the helicopters, leaving the embassy at in Vietnam, and then we had a similar video of people running along beside the jet trying to grab a hold of the wings of the jet so they could fly out of Afghanistan. Those two things didn't quite. They looked similar, but they were also very different. What was your impression of that?
Yeah, the evacuations, the chaos, and all that other stuff was awful. I do home care. I'm living with my parents in a retirement village and here in the Phoenix area. But one of my newer clients is a 70-year-old woman who was evacuated the week before that chaotic scene in Saigon. Yeah, very interesting to hear her experience, and then her husband, who is the aging one that needs some care. But he had adopted a 8 and 10-year-old, or he had married her, his third marriage. But when she had an 8 and 10-year-old kid that was left to her by her Vietnamese husband, who they got a divorce. So he was the stepfather to these two kids, and it was a very interesting thing to hear their stories. But these are the little people to people connections, the things that America is rich in, these stories, and that these second generation, third generation types will go back either between Vietnam or China or these other different countries. We were just talking about Iraq or Afghanistan just now, but we have the same stuff going on in Iraq. I live in Phoenix, and I've met people who are, someone described he was part of the Iraqi Syrian church, and then another one was part of his family was in the Orthodox Church. All these things I didn't know about before. My father was in the Korean War, and the whole issue of babies that were not as much lifted out at that time. There was a lot less acceptance of Asian babies in the United States. Pearl Buck of the Good Earth fame was in the 1950s working to get people, American families, to accept kids coming over from Korea at that point. But it wasn't easy to do. I'm also interested in on this issue, the whole people-to-people thing of the war brides thing. Not so much happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, but a huge number of, obviously Vietnam is what we think of the most, but there was a lot coming, war brides from Japan and the whole occupation period and later, and then also from Korea. My father was working as a chaplain's assistant, and said the chaplain was making a lot of important decisions on people's lives, and whether this military guy could marry this Korean woman. We have it all in our pop culture. Madame Butterfly was of a century and a half ago, but then Miss Saigon was of the Vietnam War era. And then takeoffs on the whole issue in a different setting was M. Butterfly that came out in the 1990s.
You're talking about polluting the purity of the white culture, and the bloodlines are intermixing. So I take it that you think that's a good thing, that these, and I would agree with you that I think it's a good thing to have these mixtures of cultures and even bloodlines. But yeah, you look at it from today's lens. I was on Facebook, and somebody said, do you think the Americans should apologize for invading Korea? And some Korean American said, of course not. We asked the Americans to come in, and they saved us. So no, there's no reason why Americans should apologize for what they did in Korea, and they were the good guys. So yeah, there's always two sides to all of this, and everybody's got their own opinions.
that's a good thing about, I was 3 years, I was a social studies teacher in New York, and especially among the Chinese new arrivals from China. But just that type of thing would be a good discussion topic to get debates going, and to let people in their 18, 19-year-olds in the particular school I was teaching in have participated in that sort of argument, that they will see different sides of the issue, and be confronted with it in their own situation, own marriage selections of people and dating and whatever, several years later.
My favorite story about the cross cultures is Muhammad Ali going to Iraq and rescuing, I think it was about 20 Americans that were being held hostage by Saddam Hussein. They were going to be human shields. And Muhammad Ali was probably the most well-known person in the world, certainly the most well-known Muslim. And he went to Baghdad and camped out, and he had the Alzheimer's, no, what was it? Epilepsy? One of those nervous disorders. And he was in pretty bad shape. Parkinson's, right.
Yeah.
He stayed there and wanted to talk to Saddam about the hostages, and Saddam blew him off for weeks. But everybody in Baghdad knew that Ali was in Baghdad. And sooner or later, Saddam had to see Ali. And Ali said, listen, give me the hostages and I'll make sure that your message goes to our president. But I need to take those hostages back to their families. And that's what he did. And because America is still such a melting pot, and we have so many patriotic people of all ethnicities, America has that ability, and that's one of our hidden strengths. And I'm hoping that this idea of one ethnicity being better or worse than others, I hope that fades into the background a little bit. Anything else on this subject?
On that, you were just talking about, Dennis Rodman going over to North Korea.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple years later, Trump did the same thing. He crossed the border into North Korea. So those are positive things going on.
Yeah, isn't it funny how the missiles weren't flying when Trump was in office and trying to build bridges with all these people that we thought were bad guys? Maybe they are bad guys, but it doesn't mean you can't turn some of them around to be better. Anyway, that's
a little bit of things. You talked about Mount Rushmore, and that fourth person that people in China didn't know about, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
But you could have worked a history lesson in that way. That was
I did at the English Corner. I did say that's why he's the fourth guy on that Mount Rushmore. He was a very important person in our history.
But for example, I go by movies. So Charlton Heston was in that thing about so many days in Beijing or something like that, Peking. But that was about the time of the Boxer Rebellion, and then they got in Beijing, the diplomatic corps, the embassies were surrounded, and they thought they were in danger of being killed. But that was an interesting thing that people should know about. And then before that, Commodore Perry was in Japan in the 1850s and so-called opened up Japan. Whether that was a good or bad thing, most people think it was a good thing from today's point of view, but that's arguable. But I promoting the things that I like, musicals. Stephen Sondheim's Pacific Overtures was set in about that era. And it had all sorts of things, including what's going on right now with the Russians going into, coming into Asia through the land route versus the other Europeans going the sea route. Don't touch the coat, if you have watched that, as a very interesting things for the Russians' responses.
Well,
Yeah,
we may have to edit some of this out. We're
okay.
rambling too much, I think, but
But Teddy
yeah,
Roosevelt was an important guy in that discussion. So a lot of stuff could have been thrown in.
well, Ray, you're an important guy, and so are the rest of us that feel this way. I've got a video on YouTube refers to the sperm theory of one sperm all alone. It doesn't have much chance of reaching its goal, but when you get millions of them all going towards the same goal, that's the key to life. That's the key to life. So, okay, well, we better cut this off. Appreciate your time, Ray.
Okay.
I know it was a difficult thing getting us all together on this
And
today.
thanks,
So,
Joe, for your
yes,
patience.
thank you, Joe. Thank you to Leah. Okay, see you later.
Bye.
My name is John Porter. I'm a firm believer in the sperm theory of politics. That when you try to impregnate an egg with a sperm, one little sperm really doesn't have much of a chance. The female body has a lot of defenses, but if you have millions of sperm and they're all got one thing in mind, one thing, one purpose, and that is to get to that egg. The push from millions of little sperms all going after the same objective is the key to life. It's the key to life. And I'm afraid that if we don't start thinking a little more like sperms and promoting love in this country of ours, and I'm talking about the United States of America, we've got to have a counterattack. This hatred is taking things over. One advantage of living in China is you meet foreigners. I talked to a German, and he's like 35, and he never had any idea of how the Germans could have done what they did in the genocide, in the massacres. And he said, now that I see what's happening in the United States, I get it. I understand how it happened in Germany. The good people didn't speak up. The good people didn't stand up. And the bad people took over. Well, my name is John Porter. I approve of this message. No taxpayers were harmed in the production of this video.